Hi there folks, I'd like to show you a somewhat useful shot shell reloading tool. This is a Williams Gunsight Company manufactured item, and it's called a primer pocket peener. There's a bit of a mouthful for you. Unfortunately, the Williams Company no longer manufactures this tool, but they are made by a couple of other manufacturers, and I'll talk about those in a little while. Now this tool is used in conjunction with shot shell loading, and it is used to tighten up primer pockets in shotgun hulls which have become loose either through repeated use, pressure, or being stretched by using the wrong size of primer. Now normally with most shotgun hulls, for instance cheap 12 gauge hulls, cheap 20 gauge hulls, you would just throw the hull away if it exhibited any looseness in the primer pocket. But sometimes hulls are too valuable to just throw away. For instance, I've got these 16 gauge Rio hulls, and 16 gauge hulls are a little bit hard to come by, so I like to keep any of them that I got in good order and keep reusing them as long as possible. Also, sort of the same thing applies with 10 gauge hulls. You kind of hate to throw those away, and also with 28 gauge hulls, same thing. They're a little bit harder to come by, so it's nice to be able to reuse these as long as possible. So I'll show you what has happened with this Rio hull. Now these Rio hulls are, I don't know, they must be fairly soft metal in the case heads because the primer pockets are loose almost immediately from the first factory firing. Even when using a larger primer like a Cheddite, they still have a loose fit even after the one firing. But to demonstrate how loose these primer pockets are, I've got a decapped Rio hull here that's been sized, and I've got a Winchester 209 primer, and I can actually just seat this primer with finger pressure. You can see it falls basically right in to the hull. So that is obviously not acceptable, because the primer can actually fall out of this at any given time. You could probably even get this primer to come out just by tapping it loosely. See there, it just fell right out. So this tool will let you swage down a ring of metal around the primer pocket, and that will tighten the primer pocket up so that you can continue to keep the primers in there and reuse these hulls. So it's a very simple tool to use. We've got this base here which is made out of steel, and it's blued steel. You can see you got a bit of a knurling around it, and the important bit is this raised portion here, and that's the portion that upsets the metal into the primer pocket. And then we've got this rod that fits inside that and fits inside the hull itself, and this portion goes down inside the hull here, or through the primer pocket and into the base of the tool. Forgive all the background noise here. There's a bit of a wind issue outside. We've got a blizzard going on at the moment, so if you hear all kinds of strange noises in the background, that's the noise from outside coming down here. Anyway, the only thing you need along with your hulls and this tool is a hammer of some sort, and I would recommend a plastic faced hammer, because if you hit this with a metal hammer you're probably going to broom over the end and cause some damage to the tool. So I'm going to set this whole thing up down on the concrete floor where it's a little more sturdy, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, I've moved down from the top of the bench down to the floor here. It's nice to have a good firm surface below this tool when you're hitting it, and there might be too much rebound off your wooden bench surface for this to work quite as well as you should. I've just got a pine board on the floor here just to keep from marring the actual tool itself. So it's very easy to use this. Basically, once you've knocked the primer out of your hulls, you just insert the tool into the shell with the rod extending out through the primer hole, and insert the rod into the base of the tool with this flange portion up towards the shell. We'll set that down on our firm surface, and we'll give it a couple of good smacks with our plastic face hammer. And hopefully that has swaged the material down enough that primer no longer falls into the shell. So let's see, we've got the same Winchester primer that we had earlier, so we'll drop that into the shell and see if it falls in or if it needs force. So you can see now that the primer does not fall right into the shell. There's some good resistance there, and it'll be necessary to use the reloading press to seat that primer the rest of the way. So that's the desired result. So until you get the feel of using this tool, it's kind of a good idea to bring a primer with you and try it in the shells as you kind of develop a feel for how much of a blow to land on that to get the desired result. Although this Williams brand tool is no longer in production, you will sometimes find them on eBay or at gun shows and that sort of thing. And it is usable with 10, 12, 16, 20, and 28 gauge shells, but it won't work with the 410 because it is too large a diameter to fit inside of the 410. Now there are a couple of other companies which make a kind of a more, well, I shouldn't say modern, it's basically the same design. A copy of this tool, I guess, is a better way to describe it. Precision Reloading makes two versions of this type of tool. They have a larger tool which is for 10 through 28 gauges, and it's called a primer pocket correction tool, and those ones are $18.99 at this point in time on their website. And they have a smaller 410 bore version which is $20.99. It's basically the same thing with this portion of the tool reduced in diameter to fit inside of the 410 hull. Ballistic's products also makes a version of this type of tool. They have a single size, and it will work with everything from 410 right up to 10 gauge, and it is $18.99. They call theirs the Universal Primer Pocket Conditioner. So not a tool that you need an awful lot when you're into reloading shot shells, but it is kind of handy when you've got hulls which are otherwise good except for the primer pockets being loose, and it'll let you have a few more reloadings out of them, and especially for the less common gauges like those 10s, 16s, and 28s, it's nice to keep the hulls going as long as possible. With the 20 gauge and the 410 and the 12 gauge, it's not really as important. Usually there's a much greater supply of those kind of hulls around, and usually you can just replace the entire hull. But if you want to, you can use it on those as well. Anyway, just thought I'd show that tool in operation, and perhaps that'll be handy information for some of you guys who reload shotgun shells. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later.